So good morning. Did I say that already? Good morning. 62 years ago today, in 1963, the Penn Central Conference was in the middle of its very first annual meeting. It was at Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster. Now, prior to this, the Committee of 70, now that in itself should make you laugh. The Committee of 70 had worked up several proposals for how Pennsylvania was going to be divided into conferences in the new United Church of Christ. Now, in discussion were the options of one conference, 3, 4, or 5 conferences, never 2, interestingly. The 4-conference proposal was approved by the Committee of 70, and all judicatories had voted for it by 1963. Now, Walensky, if you don't know, we have a little book called Penn Central Conference at 50 Years, which is full of some fantastic information. But he has this great quote. He tells us, "The launching of a large ship and the launching of a large church conference have several things in common. A ship needs a workable design guaranteeing that the vessel will float and be seaworthy. The ship must be able to slide down the greased timbers after it has been commissioned. And the ship must not capsize." And if any of you saw what happened in North Korea a few weeks ago, you know what that looks like when it slides down and capsizes. The conference launched in 1963. And at that time, our fleet was 288 churches strong. Have you ever noticed how, like, it doesn't matter what you do, this happens at every meeting? I mean, it can run perfectly. By the way, I came across that Penn Central Lane sign and just came across it and took a picture of it. So it's out there somewhere. So of the 288 churches, 122 churches were single charge. That is, it had one pastor serving one congregation. Now, the membership of those 122 churches was about 53,000. That's almost twice what our entire conference membership is now, just of those churches. And the average size of those congregations was 433. Besides those single charge churches, we had 31 2-point charges, 19 3-point, 9 4-point, and 1 each of 5 and 6-point charges. While the easy majority of our churches at that time were full-time positions in the sense that they employed one person fully for the 2-point or 3-point or 4-point charge, in 2025, 70% of our clergy are part-time. Big change. Big change. We had 183 full-time and part-time pastors serving churches. 80 were classified without charge. That means usually, not that they didn't have any energy, but they were often chaplains and things like that. But this number, 28 were retired. 28. Do you have any idea how many retired clergy we now have? We have almost 300 clergy. Over half. The average size of all congregations was 268. And 68% of those were what we would now call star churches. That is, they were located in villages, hamlets, and open country. So it's not surprising that that number is pretty much the same now. And heartbreaking to me, although I understand why it happened, but heartbreaking to me is that there were 50 union churches. 50. And we now have less than a handful. And that's the evangelical and reformed combined with the Lutherans. On our board of directors, we had 30 people, 10 clergy, all male, 10 each male and female laypersons. They were very intentional. They were trying to mirror the national setting and the intention of having women as a strong representation from the beginning. Now, the social issues of the day in which our people were involved sound like today in some respects. Agitating for global peace, standing in solidarity with others regarding racial justice. However, we were also immersed in the Vietnam War. And we did, as a conference, send money to the United Church of Canada in order to provide food and shelter for those running to Canada to avoid the draft. That was something that we participated in. Our social focus was part of the DNA from the very beginning and reflected what the wider church was doing at that time. Now, as we move forward after 1963, Penn Central came to face what was already facing the United Church of Christ and other denominations. Our churches started to leave or close, beginning with 30 in the first 10 years. Unfortunately, that trend continued through the 70s, through the 80s, through the 90s, up to today, where we stand with 168 churches. In 2005, the decision of General Synod to affirm marriage equality resulted in the loss of a further 20 churches. We also started to lose clergy because the social ills, see if this sounds familiar, the social ills and tumult of the wider society were heaping so much stress and anxiety onto the heads of clergy in their churches. Now, I share these statistics for a few reasons. The first is because I believe in unflinching transparency when it comes to who we are, where we have been, where we are now, and where we go in the future. There is grief in these numbers, but we have to look at it straight on. We must look at it straight on. We can't look away. As each of us knows, the place of church in our society has changed dramatically in 62 years. We all know that. And I share stats not as a judgment or as a Debbie Downer, which is the phrase that keeps flying around our meeting. Nobody wants to be a Debbie Downer. But I do it to keep us anchored in reality so that we're always aware of where we stand as a conference and how things have changed. I believe, being a historian, that the only way to understand how to go forward is to understand our past and be truthful about our past. While I share for transparency, I also know that they are not the whole story. They are not the whole story of the Penn Central Conference. That is an image from the Hartman Center from last year. While yes, we still deal with the trends that we've had, our churches remain places of transformation, healing, connection, passion, and places where the Holy Spirit moves and makes itself known. This conference has been life-changing for thousands of people. Think about that. Thousands of people. Penn Central has shaped countless souls through the life of its congregations, the ministry of its chaplains, the fellowship and belonging at Hartman Center, not to mention work camps, disaster ministries, confirmation classes, Sunday schools, and everything else in between. Weddings at Hartman Center. These things build on each other, right? Never for one moment must we ever think that the life or faith of Penn Central Conference has been lost over time. Ever. It has not. It has not been lost. And it will join with the life and faith of the 3 other Pennsylvania conferences to become one of the options considered by the Committee of 70. One conference. But before we go through that merger and some of the votes we're going to take today to move us in that direction, I want to reflect on the conference now. In the classic form of the state of the conference, I would stand up here and talk to you about OCWM. Already did that. We could talk about search and call and the challenges of search and call. Nora gets to do that later. But instead, what I want to do, as I thought about this, is that I want to tell you what I see from my brief time with you since 2019, the strengths that Penn Central has that we will bring into our shared future. So this is about you all. This is about you all. The first thing is that we are a social conference. Hence the slide. This is the kind of thing that Penn Central would do. If we had a fleet of boats, if we could move our churches around, we would decorate them and take them on a parade to show one another. By that, I mean that we enjoy being together. We like each other. There are strong relationships between churches and church members and other churches. And you know what? Some of these connections are centuries old. They go back generationally, multiple generations of clergy and more. I was speaking with somebody yesterday, where Jan is, who said, oh, and my grandfather was a minister. But then I heard Patty, where are you? Patty talking with Mike Price, this morning. Well, Patty was confirmed and baptized by Mike Price. Now, if we, that's what it was. And he brought her to her first PCC annual meeting. Now, if we did some of that in this room, I guarantee we'd have all kinds of those types of connections throughout the room. So I'm not saying that we don't have difficulties or troubles, and we do. We do. But this conference, in my experience, by and large, is filled with generally happy, faithful people who love being with others. And when this crew is together, there is love in the room. That's my experience of you all. And I've seen it play out throughout the conference. I know that you treasure these connections that you have. I know you do. Nora and I talk about this a great deal, and David, and Kevin. I promise we will do whatever we can to continue to foster the connections among all of you. And our team is devoted to that. So you can hold me to that promise. Tell me in another year you haven't done it, or tell me in another year we're doing okay. Now, our second major strength, thanks to Carrie with AI assistance, we have purple churches. Purple churches are those who have a mix of red and blue political, social, theological perspectives. Our churches mimic the entire spectrum of the United Church of Christ. Yes, we have fully red churches, and we have fully blue. I noticed that they put a red seat in the blue boat, but they didn't put a blue seat in the red boat. We do have those churches, but most of our churches are purple. Now, the reason this matters is because they demonstrate something particularly important, a hint about how to live and worship with people who are different, who think differently. One of my pastors told me about how he looks out into the congregation and sees a woman who works for Planned Parenthood sitting and talking with a man who's a member of the NRA. The reason they're able to both be there together is because Christ is their center. That is the center, is Jesus, particularly in that church. When Christ is what unites us, we come back to a place of plurality, awareness that we are not the only kind of Christian in the room, a recognition. In the body of Christ, there is great diversity. That diversity can be very challenging, especially when we think some people are real Christians and other people aren't real Christians. And I don't imagine that ever happens with any of you. But we have to encourage humility and embrace our purple heart so that we can continue to minister to all of our people. That is very important. Now, my father used to say to me, I am a Christian first. I am an American second. I am a Republican third. That stuck with me, and I was just a kid the first time I heard him say that. But our unity comes not only from our shared denominational history, but a shared, committed, Christ-centered faith. That is what I hear in our churches. Now, our purple churches offer us the privilege of being an important voice in the wider United Church of Christ. It is our purple churches who speak the truth about what the nature of the UCC really is on the ground. And every time I go to national, this comes up. Every time. Because the number of assumptions that are made about who we are as the UCC, and they're incorrect. And it is because of you all that I can say, no, life is much more complex, and it should be. It should be. And our churches speak to that. I thank you for that. Not only do we have purple churches, we have great clergy. And I'm including the dog, which you knew I would, right? Now, I do just want to say that the picture on the left, I had some fun with ChatGPT, and it took me probably 10 instructions to get to a place where we have a very, it's a very PC picture, isn't it? It's very PC. But I said to it at the end, I said, would you please make it more obvious that they're in a boat together? And so it kind of understood. But this other picture is what some of our clergy look like. Now, not only do we have purple churches, which I believe are a gift, but we have outstanding clergy. We have outstanding clergy. We have clergy who are effective, loving pastors and chaplains in places where people of difference live, work, and worship together. Right now in today's America, as hard as it might be for any of us, this is the gift that you as clergy bring to the wider world. This is the gift. The ability to meet people where they are, to lead in situations where Republicans, Democrats, independents, libertarians, and anything else are in the room, to hold your own with both traditional and contemporary theological language, with new music and old hymns and old hymnals, with pastoral care that tests every fiber of your being, as families, strangers, members of the congregation, friends, wrangle, argue, accuse, and convict one another in the endless gamut of ideological positions. That's our reality. Okay. I'm not saying it's easy or that we should ignore offensive actions. We have to care for our own souls, but you can, and your congregations can demonstrate something to the wider world, that loving others comes first. Loving others comes first. That loving our neighbors beyond political party. That nothing and no one can outdo God's love. And trust me, I know it's not easy. I know there are churches where people are gathering just to talk about how they can't deal and figure out how to deal with whatever the reality is around them that's affecting them the most. But this is what you can give to the wider world. Loving others comes first. Finally, we have deep theological roots. I had to get this in here somewhere. We are still one of, if not the only place where I can say Mercersburg theology and not get only bewildered looks, okay? And many, if not most of our churches reflect the influence of Mercersburg without even realizing it. If you've got an altar up in the front of your church, this comes from Mercersburg theology, from the thinking about Mercersburg. We have a church that was architecturally designed around Mercersburg. I'm pointing at Chris Rankin, East Petersburg. I was surprised when I was visiting a church recently that still had kneelers. Okay, for me, that's like a huge deal. Kneelers. All right. But for those of you who do not know what Mercersburg is all about, our German Reformed shared heritage and our little congregational blip in Shamokin, because we have one left. There were only 3 at the beginning, but we have one congregational Welsh church left. And David's got one too, I believe. Our Reformed heritage, and the congregations were Reformed too, our Reformed heritage shines through in this conference. What does that look like for us? A shared theological heritage means that, 1, we remain committed to Jesus Christ as the head of the church, period. Now you might say, but that's obvious. I'm here to tell you it's not. How many conversations I have been in our national setting, with other people who want to question that statement. and that maybe each church needs to decide for itself who's the head of the church. Oh boy. Luckily, I get to retire in a few years. We remain committed to Jesus as the head of the church. We recognize and employ worship practices that reflect a strong Reformed background. Hello, prayer of confession. Now, we talk about sin. We talk about imperfection because we know, and our Reformed heritage teaches us, that claiming ourselves as sinners is not dangerous. What is dangerous is claiming that we are not sinners. The third thing is we embrace the abiding importance of communion. Mercersburg was big on communion, and it has that sense. And there are those who still in Mercersburg tradition experience that sense of mystical union with Christ in the midst of the meal. But we all feel deeply connected to that meal. And the way I hear people talk about communion is how critical it is to the life of their church. And we commit to unity, not uniformity. Because Jesus prayed that they all may be one, and because our German Reformed ancestors, which you may not know, recognized unity as a divine desire, they were the least schismatic of any Reformed group. They would rather build a second church on the property so that people over there could speak German and people here could speak English, as they did in Lebanon County, than divide. So the unity is a divine desire. All of these speak to our solid theological foundation, which I believe needs to be shared with the wider UCC. I try to do so as often as I can. All of your voices are very, very important. We have theological heft. We have theological history. We have deep, committed, Reformed faith. We need to be open and proud of that and share that with the wider church. Now, the last slide is kind of a future-oriented thing, of course. All of these are gifts that Penn Central has and will bring into the Keystone Conference, many of which are shared by our other conferences. I know that we can be leaders. I know that. Not in an act of desperate survivalism, but in a spirit of hope and possibility. Because, friends, as I keep having to remind myself, God owns the horizon. God's already on the horizon. God owns the horizon. That's what we're sailing toward, is God's horizon. And we trust God is fully there and knows the good and beautiful things that lie ahead for us in that future. Now I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege. First of all, those are Adirondack guide boats, and that is a Adirondack guide boat race. And yeah, there is somebody who's leading the pack. That would be me. Okay, you don't have, it was a long time ago. But I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to you for hiring me as a transitional conference minister and then calling me to be your conference minister since 2019. And some of the original members of that search team are here. I spoke to one earlier. But I want to thank all of you because all of you voted. I feel deeply fortunate to be the final Penn Central Conference minister. We don't always agree. I wrestle with my own pastor, which he will clearly tell you. Yes, he says, we do. We don't always agree. But I could not imagine a better position or a better place for me to have landed. It was by the grace of God. I could not imagine a better staff, and honestly, I won't even try to say what I would like to be able to say about my relationship with Nora. We met when I was still working at the seminary, and then I became the chair of the Committee on Ministry, and then it took off from there. But working with Nora, working with Paul, working with Dwight, working with Ronette, there's just been nothing better in my life. Nothing. Thank you for never treating me as an outsider. And where's Bill LaSalle? Okay. I'm convinced you never treated me as an outsider because when I was interviewed by the board of directors, somebody asked if I had ever had scrapple. And thanks to Reverend Bill Worley, I had before I was asked. So I was able to say yes. And they had these delighted looks on their faces. But thank you for never treating me as an outsider, for your hospitality and your grace, and for all the good and the difficult work that we've done together. Thank you. Thank you.